Welcome to the latest episode of the Lawyers Coach podcast. I'm Ollie Hansard, and I'm delighted to have Claire Rason with me, my co-host. Hey Claire, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Looking forward to this episode.
And who have you been speaking to?
So I have been speaking to another non-lawyer. This series, we've had a couple of those. And in this episode, it's Rob Bauer. Rob is the managing partner of Montagu Evans. They're a property consultancy. Interestingly, they are a partnership. So again, much like Nikki Owen, lots of overlap there in terms of partnerships and how they're managed. And I caught up with Rob to talk about the trend of offices and the concerns I think some firms are currently seeing around how to get individuals back in.
I'm really enjoying the notion of having some non-lawyers bring different perspectives from outside the industry onto the podcast.
Yeah, no, I'm really enjoying it. I think, both Nikki and Rob in this episode provide some insights that I think really will hopefully make lawyers, both private practice and in-house, think differently about certain topics.
I think that's right, because as you listen to Rob, the industry can start to see how other partnerships are dealing with critical issues, in this case, obviously, getting people back into the office. And so learning from outside the legal industry, I think is just really helpful. So let's press play.
So we always start our podcasts by trying to understand a little bit about how you ended up in the role that you are in.
I've been at the firm a very long time. So I joined in 1994. And so I've been here man and boy, really. Worked up as a surveyor, started life as a qualified valuer, doing mostly work in London in the development space, because we do a lot of development work as a practice. And I've moved into various senior leadership roles, management roles over the years, ultimately ending up in this seat as managing partner of the firm overall. So, so it's a fairly simple story in that respect.
And we are going to be talking about the legal profession. We're going to be talking about, in particular, the impact that hybrid working is having on that profession. But I think there's probably quite a lot of overlap in terms of perhaps some of the things that you're seeing as a partnership, as a professional services firm. So we'll look at things from both angles. I guess where I wanted to start was where, we've had this conversation offline, and I wanted to sort of pick up the offline conversation online, which is I'm hearing more and more from lawyers, from particularly legal leaders, how difficult it is to create cohesion when, some of the team are in the office, some of the team are working from home. So I guess we'll start with, are you seeing the same thing in your firm?
The return to work post-COVID, return to offices or work in offices does, I think, have a number of similarities across those different professional services businesses. But I think there are some differences as well. So I don't think you can just apply I think we're all slightly looking for a silver bullet answer, as we all tend to. We all say we're not looking for a silver bullet answer, but we really are. And I don't think there is one. I think you genuinely need to start to look at the nature of the underlying sort of drivers of the business, what they actually do in the different areas of the business, and probably nuance how you're approaching that sort of cohesion, collaboration, return to the office perspective. For example, we don't time record across the whole of our business. Lawyers generally time record across their business. So there is, I think, quite a bit of, certainly in lawyers' terms, they're looking at the data and would say, from a recovery perspective, to them they were recovering more billable hours pre-COVID, when everyone was working in the office 5 days a week, than they are now. And so it's dead simple. We get everybody back in the office 5 days a week, we're going to recover more billable hours. Maybe that is the answer. I would suggest perhaps it's not as simple as that, and you do need to think about the impact that is having on your people, having on their mental health and well-being, on their happiness, and all of that leading to productivity and output. So as a business, if I just do some stats, I mean, as a business, our occupancy levels are now on a Monday up near 70%, probably over 70, just over 70%, 100% pretty much Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then falls off a cliff to 20 or 25% on a Friday. I think the bit to probably keep in mind there, I'm not sure how different that is to the way we were working pre-COVID. As a surveying and property business, we have people out on site, we have people at clients' offices, we have people out doing business development, and quite often that was done out of the office, sometimes over lunch, frankly, sometimes on a golf course on a Friday. So I don't think we were ever operating at 70%, 80%, 100% on a Friday. We were probably always operating at something under 50%. So I think it's the relative drop that we probably need to be looking at. And in that context, I'm not as sure the drop-off is as big as perhaps some people think.
And I suspect there are some listeners thinking, gosh, if only we were at 100% for 3 days of the week. What is it that Rob is doing to get those numbers?
It is a choice in some respects to be there. And I think probably worth remembering, in my people come to work, they're volunteers, paid volunteers, but they're volunteers. They're not under some sort of prison sentence to come into work. So they're all there as volunteers ultimately, and I think it's worth having that in mind when you set the rules, if you like, or the guidance. We have approached it by making it clear that we see ourselves as an office-based business. We don't see ourselves as a fully remote business, but that we do embrace agile working, and we do embrace this move towards a more flexible and on a part of the time working remotely or working from home basis. We've tried to encourage people to look at that on a sort of hierarchy structure, I suppose, of clients first, team second, individual third, to encourage people to think about it from a client-centric perspective, but also from a team-centric perspective, rather than just from an individual point of view. If we start to sort of perhaps almost look at it a bit generationally as well, I mean, quite a lot of the younger people in the business have been back in the office pretty quickly. They wanted to be back in the office, and that's for a whole host of reasons. I think it's both for social reasons. Let's not forget the office or work but certainly for many people in professional services is part of how they build their social network. Some of the more senior or older generations in the business that may live further out, may have a longer commute, who are not perhaps as willingly coming back to the office. That's certainly our experience. It may be different in other businesses, and that may be because they don't have as much desire or need to build a social network, because whether they're right or wrong, they think they've got all the friends they need and they don't need any more. And the commute becomes the deterrent as there's certainly one potential factor, that long commute. And I think there is a piece, not that we can solve that, that's obviously outside of our control, but I genuinely think there is a piece there for governments and local authorities and transport companies in this country. It's all very well talking about better designed offices, the culture in offices and all the rest of it. One of the really big things that surveys constantly show that is deterring people from coming into the office is the commute and the transport, the awful experience they have on that commute, not just the length of it, but the experience they have on that commute. The other aspect that I think it's sort of worth remembering in terms of the work from home and doing everything over a Zoom call, of this sort of nature, is it seems to the pendulum almost swung too far the other way. And if we suggested that we ran our friendships via Zoom, I think people would think we're pretty bonkers. If I suggested, I tell you what, let's run our families by Zoom. So we won't meet. We'll just all sit in separate rooms and get on Zoom calls together. You would think I was completely bonkers. If we said, let's educate our children via Zoom on it, you'd think we were bonkers. So how do we think it's okay for work to operate on that? I mean, it's just not. There are certain things where, again, we'd all probably acknowledge that if you do certain things by email, it can come across really badly. People can misinterpret it. Why? Because it's a fairly narrow, blunt form of communication. Equally, I would say not doing it face-to-face over Zoom. What are we talking about? 60%, 70% efficiency compared to face-to-face? So if we acknowledge there's a 30 to 40% chunk of something that's lost there, I think the need to be face-to-face, the need to get people together is self-evident to many people. And that's why they want to come back into our offices. So that kind of links back to culture, which would be my last point. You've got to have a culture. You can have the best designed offices in the world. If you've got a crap culture, then people aren't going to come in. I don't know whether this is appropriate for me to say this, but when you look at the return to work stats of a lot of public sector organisations, they're really poor. And I would say a lot of them don't have a very good culture. And so you could put them in the best offices we could possibly design. I'm not sure that would necessarily encourage a load of people to come back. So I think there is a really important cultural part about it, and binding people together, and businesses where there is and be honest about it as well. Maybe there are certain areas of your business where collaboration is not really necessary, in which case don't force people to come back to the office or even necessarily think about encouraging it. If there is parts of your business where you need really heavy collaboration, then boy, do you need to try and create an environment where they will want to come and do that. And that's probably the last point, isn't it? Back to what we do as a business or the real estate market. There is a transformation going on of creating spaces, redefining this word office. What is an office? It isn't a factory full of desks any longer. It is a space where you create something that's almost more akin to the home environment, the domestic environment, where there are lots of places for casual interaction, conversations, people to sit down and share experiences and knowledge together, not just banks of desks and maybe from a legal perspective, I don't know, the challenge there might be lots of glass boxes or rooms with people sitting in individual spaces. I think cellularized and open plan is it is a really difficult aspect of modern office design.
It's interesting, I think, that as firms are moving from full occupancy to a hybrid model, which perhaps requires less space if designed in the same way as before, i.e., we don't need as much space for desks. I wonder if there is a shift towards downsizing, or whether there is a shift towards saying, okay, well, we need to use this space differently. So, whilst the same space might not have the same number of desks in it, we can do something slightly different with that space. So I wonder if you've got any reflections on that, either whether you have any idea of kind of what the trend is, and any thoughts on whether that's the right way to go.
Our own experiences that actually went from we took a bit more space when we moved, not less, but the additional space was designed to create more non-desk based spaces. So we went from a fairly traditional office arrangement with 250 people based in that office, 250 desks, some ground floor meeting rooms and a reception area, and then some internal meeting rooms up on the floors, and the rest just filled with rows of desks, to an arrangement where we had 220 desks, not 250 desks, for probably a head count at day one of about 300 and now of about 375. But the additional spaces where we were creating places for people to work, as well as places for people to meet, both formally and informally, got us towards something like 480 places to work in some form or another. It might not be a desk, but another space where you could do some work. So that's our own experience. We sort of planned that pre-COVID. Thankfully, it not only remained relevant post-COVID, but became even more relevant. And in terms of market trends, I would say that's probably what we're seeing people moving towards, in as much as less desks, fixed desks, and more non-desk type spaces. On the sort of general market trends towards more space or less space, in our experience, that does tend to vary depending on the industry or sector. So, and probably on the size of the business as well, actually. So if you're a reasonable sized business, and perhaps therefore is inevitably siloed, we are seeing a number of businesses that are working on the basis of bringing in teams or groups of teams on different days, in which case potentially you can significantly shrink your office floor plate, the amount of space that you occupy, because you're only bringing in a proportion of your business on any given day. For other businesses, where they may be smaller business or medium-sized business, or where collaboration across the business as a whole, rather than within business units, remains highly relevant to how you service your clients and your work, then you've got the challenge of your peak days are still going to be trying to get absolutely everybody in which case you can't really shrink your floor plate very much, because you need to allow for maximum capacity on those peak days. So it kind of tends to vary depending on the nature of the industry or the business, and probably the size of the business.
As someone who is kind of business development focused, it's interesting because I imagine there are firms that are thinking about bringing in teams, but actually what you lose is that ability to work across different teams and think about how you can service clients slightly differently.
Yeah.
And the other kind of reflection that I'm having, and it'd be interested to see how your industry is responding. So it's one thing to design a space that allows for people to go and play ping pong or do something slightly different, but actually there's also a piece around giving people permission when they're in the office to be playing ping pong, to be in one of those spaces working slightly differently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that has to be driven by the firm, but I wonder how much that is present in the minds of property companies that are looking at redesigning spaces. You can redesign a space. If no one's there, then you just have a pretty space.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose we're back to the culture thing. All of these bits knit together. There isn't this sort of silver bullet piece. If we take London and we take the city as example, there is a clear trend underway. For example, for businesses migrating from Canary Wharf back to the city, and sort of ask yourself why that's the case. And if you look at what those businesses are doing, they might be financial businesses, they might be professional services businesses. They are generally seeking to trend, and these probably are businesses that are trying to get as great a number of people in the office as they can on any given day. So they are looking generally at taking smaller amounts of space, maybe not vastly reduced, but certainly a reasonable reduction, 20 to 30% reduction, maybe 50% at the most in a few cases, but I would have said it's less than that as a rule. So taking less space, but better quality space, and in a different, whether you could say it's a better location. I don't necessarily want to pitch Canary Wharf against the city, but different location. You've got an area that has evolved over hundreds of years, rather than an area that has been built as a single, effectively sort of city. Whatever the reasons, the trend of occupiers is to begin to start to look back towards the city. Maybe the accessibility is better, maybe the food and beverage and the amenities are better. It's just a more diverse built environment, I suspect. So that's what they're kind of gravitating towards, and taking better quality space, but slightly less of it. A number of law firms who've done that recently, and a number of finance houses and insurance companies and other people that have done that. two quite big drivers to that. What's so-called war for talent, so better quality space to compete for the brightest minds and get the best young talent to come and work in the space that you've created. And secondly, to move into space that is appropriate to the CSR commitments or net zero carbon commitments that most of those businesses have given or made to their workforce and to their clients.
You were one of kind of the first, I think, to start. I mean, partly because you had new space to start to start going back into the office early on, and I wonder how much that is driven by the fact that your clients are obviously in the property sector. Their bread and butter is real estate. Therefore, they want people to be in buildings because that's where they make their money, and therefore, advising them makes sense to also be in a building. And also this idea of the property industry, I think, has a reputation for being one which is, does business face to face, that likes to have that contact. So I wonder how much that influences your business, and I guess extending that out, thinking about with professional services, many will be based in London. Are you seeing other industries starting to come back into London, therefore starting to have that kind of feeling of, well, we need to be here because this is where our clients are at the moment?
Yeah. So on the first point about being in the property industry and are we buying our own sell, basically? I think there's a degree of that. We're in real estate, so we tend to be pro real estate. So there is a bit of an echo chamber risk, and we believe that what we're doing is reflective of what's happening out in the wider market, which I think is sort of leading to your second point. And so if we talk about the real estate, they are sort of voting with their feet and coming back into offices, and you will probably see a greater push amongst people in the property industry to be using the property that they're in or encouraging people. In this increasingly data-driven world, though, I think we do have enough data for objective challenge and a sense check on whether it's just a bunch of property people believing their own rhetoric. So across other industries, it varies quite considerably. If you look at some of the stats, we're probably seeing the highest sort of take-up numbers across finance, law, certain areas of the professional services market. And certainly talking to one of the senior officers at the City of London recently, he said our numbers show that law has actually been the strongest returner to use of the space, and the technology companies that we have in the city are at the weakest end of the spectrum. So I can't remember exactly what numbers he was talking about, but sort of 65 to 70% take up amongst law firms, return to offices, 40% amongst technology companies. So definitely varies across industries. I think the other thing which is worth noting is it is also changing over time. And I think there is an element of people getting into patterns. There is quite a bit of research out there that, once people have established a routine, it takes quite a long time to break that routine and re-establish a new routine. And clearly we have learned or established a number of new routines through COVID and remote working. And it is going to take quite a long time for those routines to be rewritten. In some cases, hopefully they won't be fully rewritten, because I think we'd all recognize there are benefits to the way we're working now. Ultimately, maybe we'll end up establishing a variety of routines, because it's clear that some employers are probably being quite heavy-handed about return to work and their expectations, almost in a threatening way. you want a job, get back in the office. Some people will respond to that and return for, frankly, being paid what they might consider to be a significant amount of money. Others will say, no, thanks very much. I'm going to go and work somewhere else and reassess my work-life balance. So it's going to lead to quite a lot of change, people moving around, perhaps an opportunity for employers to differentiate themselves.
A final question on that idea of choice. For those that are listening that are wondering, which direction to go in, do we, keep the same space? Do we move? What advice would you have for them?
Start with the clients and the people. Certainly in professional services businesses, client-facing businesses, I think really important for those businesses to ask themselves, how are our clients working? What do they expect? What serves them best? And to be really open about that with your people. Make it part of the dialogue, make it part of a consultation and a collaboration, so that everybody across the business understands ultimately we are doing this because it's supporting our clients. And then to come to their people and say, okay, how within the context of what we need to do to best serve our clients, how do we create an environment that is supportive as possible for you as individuals? Those two forces, I think, are what should be driving anybody thinking about where they locate their space, what type of space they take, how they design it. And that will vary, I guess, from business to business. Are you going to get lots of clients still visiting the office? Have you got a lot less clients visiting the office now? Are you working much more remotely with them? All of those things will impact how and what type of space you take, how you design it. And then having done that, then I think you move to your people and go, right, what suits our people best in terms of location? What suits our people best in terms of type and style of space? What type of culture have we got? And are we trying to nurture? How important is collaborate? Genuinely, how important is every business says, oh, collaboration is really important, but really, how important is it? And which bits of the business is it really important in? And which bits of the business is it less important in? And if you've got parts of the business where they need quiet, studious time, focusing on documents or leases, then either create an environment for them in the office where that works, or recognize that actually home may well be a better place for those people to concentrate and be really productive. Because ultimately, that's what most businesses are trying to focus on, how they increase or improve their productivity. So don't take a silver bullet approach. What is it that will enhance and increase productivity? And that isn't necessarily just assuming getting everybody back into the office is the right answer for that, I think.
I could carry on talking to you for hours, but thank you so much. Really helpful insights there, I'm sure, for people listening. So thank you.
Pleasure, Claire. Thank you very much for having me.
Fantastic conversation, Claire. Thanks ever so much for that. What stood out for you as you spoke to Rob?
So what was really interesting for me was Rob clearly works in the property industry, and therefore, one might assume that the conversation would have gone in the direction of, trends in office builds and how, you can make the physical space one which is attractive to employees. And, there was an element of that, obviously, but this idea of culture, really struck me, coming from someone from the property industry, that it all comes back to culture. And the way of thinking about the space, for me, really resonated in terms of, why do we need to have people in the office? What do we need them to do when they're in the office? And how do we create an environment where people want to come? And I think that conversation is one that law firms need to be having more of, rather than, we need to get people back in, questioning why, and thinking about how to achieve things differently. I think hopefully is going to be a takeaway for many of our listeners from Rob's conversation.
That's right. And he had that really helpful hierarchy, didn't he? One's thinking process should really be what's best for the client, then what's best for your team, and then what's best for the individual, rather than starting from a place which is, well, I only want to come in once a week. And I thought that lens of, if we're going to be a successful business and drive great client service and retain our clients, they've got to be at the top of the pyramid when it comes to our thinking about how we operate.
Absolutely. And I think from that, I would say that, wouldn't I, given it's a big part of what I do, but going out and speaking to clients, therefore, has to be part of that process, and understanding, what do clients want? Do clients feel the difference when the team is in the office together? Do clients care? And often I think we jump to assumptions, and sometimes those assumptions will be correct, but actually, the more we can go out and ask our clients to understand what they want and how best we can serve them, has to be part of the process when we think about offices and how we manage our teams and how, what's needed.
And how we work generally in the broadest sense. This notion of design the space for the task, I thought was a really great piece of advice. And, rather than having those assumptions, let's get down to what do we really need to do and where. So thanks for such a great conversation and speaking to Rob, Claire.
Not at all. It was my pleasure.
So coming up in the next episode, I had the enormous pleasure of speaking to Nikki Edwards, and she's a litigation partner at Howard Kennedy. We had a fascinating conversation when Nikki talked about litigators as the true problem solvers. She also talks about the DE&I activities that she's undertaking at Howard Kennedy.
Really looking forward to hearing from Nikki. I've spoken to Nikki a number of times and I know she is always good value, so can't wait for that.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Claire, and thanks for listening.
Lawyers Coach is brought to you by Client Talk and Hansard Coaching. If you're a lawyer and would like to take part in Lawyers Coach, please visit our website lawyercoach.co.uk for further details. And you can also join the conversation on our LinkedIn group Lawyers Coach. If there are any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, then just get in touch.